Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, host also of RT's talk show, Crosstalk. Well, many of our audience will probably recall a great movie from the 1970s, The Day of the Jackal, superbly made film, which was fictional, but it was done in a way as if it seemed like a documentary.
Yep.
Of course, the plot involved an attempt to assassinate General de Gaulle, organized by members of a failed coup attempt who are now living in exile. And this coup attempt has took place in 1961, and this is the 60th anniversary. And to commemorate this
in Algeria, right?
Yes, the coup attempt, exactly. The coup attempt was involved the protest of the French generals on the over General de Gaulle's intention to give independence to Algeria. Anyway, they organized a coup. The coup obviously failed, and then they attempted to assassinate de Gaulle. So something of the sort appears to be happening now, because in a right-wing magazine, highbrow right-wing magazine, some 60 retired generals, colonels, and even active duty French officers have signed a letter warning of dire consequences for France unless major changes are undertaken. I'll read a few excerpts from this letter, which is quite interesting. It says, "This is a grave hour. France is in peril. Mortal dangers threaten her." And then they go through some of the mortal dangers. They talk about the anti-racism campaign, which is the aim of which is to create a malaise, a hatred between communities on our soil. And then some speak of racialism, indigenism, decolonial theories. But through these terms, it is a racial war that these hateful and fanatical supporters won. They despise our country, its traditions, and its culture, and want to see it dissolve, tearing away its past and its history. They attack our statues and so on. And then he talks about the Islamism and the suburban hordes, and it's leading to the detachment of many parts of our nation and transforming them into territorial subjects, territories subject to dogmas that are contrary to our constitution. Every Frenchman should be at home everywhere in France, and there cannot be any town or district where the laws of the Republic do not apply. And then the letter authors talk about how the French police used excessive force against the yellow jacketed protesters, which was about 18 months ago to 2 years ago. And this all the while infiltrated and hooded individuals ransack businesses and threaten these forces of order. And then they say there's, that the hour is nigh. And here's the kicker right at the end. They say, on the other hand, if nothing is done, if laxity continues and spreads inexorably in society, ultimately causing an explosion, and the intervention of our active comrades in a perilous mission to protect our civilizational values and safeguard our compatriots on national territories. Now, this sounds like the generals are saying, look, unless you address some of these issues, immigration, or this wokeism that prevails in France, we, the military, maybe the retired, active service military, will have to step in and do the job for you. So this has obviously caused a bit of a problem in France. The French government has obviously attacked this letter strongly and has promised to punish, well, certainly the active duty officers who were involved in this signing this letter, but maybe even the retired officers. France does not have a First Amendment, so the French government could revoke the pensions of
yes, and they could do it legally.
Yeah, exactly. You couldn't do it in the United States because there is a First Amendment right to speech. So it would be very difficult. I mean, the government could try in the United States, but it would be difficult to achieve. So this is kind of interesting because Marine Le Pen, who is likely to be a presidential candidate next year, the elections in April 2022, has come out in support of this letter, though, you know, she did add a caveat that, you know, any change in France has to be done by political means. You know, it has to be done legally, no coups. And has asked, obviously, these officers to come and help her campaign. So it does look, I mean, because Macron is a very unpopular figure. You know, he's a sort of France's Obama. He came from nowhere, kind of largely created, good looking, charming, bankers behind him and so on, you know, but didn't really stand for anything. His absolute, you know, condition for his employment was that he could stop Le Pen. And now that was all. That's all the French elite is concerned with.
Haven't we heard that kind of strategy recently?
Right,
Who's
exactly.
chosen to stop Trump?
That's exactly it. And that's where you, and when we read this letter, and I advise you know, all of our audience to read this.
We'll put it in the description.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, it's in French, but you can always use Google Translate if anyone has difficulties. So you know, that, you know, and the things that they cite there, the problems that they cite, very much sounds familiar to anyone living in the United States. You know, rampant mobs tearing down statutes, tearing down traditions. In the meantime, the people who are punished are the patriots, the people who believe in the country, believe in its tradition. They're the ones that are sent in prison. Those who actually commit violence in the name of some ideology, you know, they take a walk. So it does look like the stage is set for a very, very interesting tussle in France coming up to the next year's presidential election. All right, Peter, what do you think?
Yeah, but I think you could say that writ large in the West, okay? I think it's more poignant in France. I've been to France before the lockdown and all this nonsense. You know, my last trip to France is, I have to say, very disappointing. Not the France I knew in the 1980s, let's put it that way. I mean, this is just, you know, I think people maybe chuckle when I say this because I'm going to go back to my favorite mantra, but, you know, this is what the professional managerial class has created. Okay. And in the European Union, it's even worse because you have what identity do you want to create? And it's always at the expense of national identities, always, okay? Trying to make everything uniform. I remember living in Poland and the Poles were so anxious to get into the EU. And I just said, you should be very, very careful because they're going to go after your culture too. It's not you're just going to get richer. And they have. I don't deny that. But there are trade-offs, okay? And they're going to be painful ones because it was identity, I would claim very strongly, it was identity, history, and culture that helped them survive being part of the Warsaw Bloc, being a communist country. And I lived there. I witnessed it myself, and that got them through. They had a safety net. They knew they had a foundation, and that foundation is almost completely eroded in France, completely.
Right. And I think, yeah, go ahead. Finish your point.
And then, you know, it's this professional managerial class. They have adopted this wokist ideology. So it's kind of it's wokeism with a postmodern spin on it, which of course is always attacking traditional identities and boundaries and genders. I mean, the very definition of what we consider society is being torn apart. And the thing is that given their past record, I don't trust them to create a new one. And anytime we've seen this in history, France is the best example with the French Revolution. You know, you can change the calendar and you can destroy the church and you can do all kinds of things. And what do you have? You get nothing. Right. You get nothing for it except for destruction, death, and suffering. Right. These people are idiots, okay? Right. You have proven for the last 60 years, you do not know how to govern.
Right.
And this is what this is saying. Now, I want our viewers to understand very, very clearly. George and I never advocate violence. I'm not advocating any kind of coup anywhere, okay? But it's very interesting that we could get this kind of letter from these types of people. Nominally speaking, I think they have the national interest at heart. I think that's a default position when you look at these people. The very fact that they're writing this letter should tell us to wake up and look at what's going on, because we can quibble about policies, but I'm looking at an entire perspective of governance, which is patently failed.
No, I think that's exactly right. And you know, we look back to the 60 years ago about the coup. Well, in that case, I mean, the coup plotters were obviously in the wrong. I mean, de Gaulle was in the right. He was right. You know, France cannot hold on to Algeria forever. I mean, you know, you got the majority of the Algerians were
Right.
Muslims, and they didn't want French rule. I mean, you couldn't rule Algeria indefinitely on the based on the minority, you know, the French pro-French minority. So it couldn't happen. De Gaulle was right. The plotters were wrong, and you know that's why de Gaulle prevailed. But in this case, as you say, I mean, these are generals. You know, they're held senior positions who clearly are very anxious about where France is going. And I think, you know, it's true that France has long had a kind of an anxiety about its identity. I mean, it's been so overwhelmed by the Anglo-Saxon world. I mean, you know, France used to, you know, the French language, you know, was used to be the official language in courts. It was the diplomatic language, and it's just simply been swept aside by.
And the angst that de Gaulle had towards the United States,
Right,
very
absolutely.
specifically, very specifically.
Very much so, exactly. And France, you know, I think is much more energetic about retaining its identity than the British. I mean, if you look at the British, I mean, the British, you know, they just seem to have thrown aside their identity. I mean, you go there and they just blindly copy the Americans. I mean, it's like institutions, they rename all their institutions along American lines. You know, there's a Supreme Court now in the UK. There's a National Security Council. even on a sort of trivial level, you know, they have Black Lives Matter. Every football match in England, you know, everyone has to take the knee because Black Lives Matter. It's an American organization. What's it got to do with the British? They now celebrate Halloween. They didn't used to when I was growing up there. I mean, it used to be Guy Fawkes night, you know, but now it's Halloween. So they ape the Americans completely.
It's really interesting. They take all of these institutional ideas, and we just take the Clash and punk rock, but we don't take anything else from these people. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. So yeah, so that I think is certainly driving some of what's going on in France. But remember, Macron himself, obviously with a view to his re-election, has expressed anxieties about what's going on in the United States right now. I mean, you know, he looks at all these AOCs and Ilhan Omars and a completely uncontrolled border, and then you know, a complete dominance of woke culture in the universities and the publishing houses, in the media, and says, no, we don't want it here. You know, no one's taking down any statues anywhere. You know, whether you like Napoleon or you don't like Napoleon, you like Louis the 16th, you don't like Louis the 16th. No one is taking down any statues, and I think it's very healthy. I mean, I think it's good that France is reacting in such a strong way.
Yeah, but it really gets the crux of the matter, and it's something I've been thinking about for a very long time now, is that can you build a cohesive society through purely civic activity? You know, a very narrow definition of what citizenship is and the relationship between the citizenship, the law, and the state. And I would say unequivocally, no, you can't do it that way, because culture matters. See, for these people, for the professional managerial people, you know, it's something that, you know, for them, it's kind of backward. It holds them back, and it's a barrier for them to recreate create the society that they think is right and proper, basically for themselves and not everybody else. And so this is this tension that we have. We have it all through the Western world. And I mean, just to, you already mentioned America. I mean, you and I have made countless numbers of videos of how you want to just trash all these institutions because you think you have a better idea. Well, people with these ideas just have a terrible road record, okay? And that's why, gradualism, how to make a society that is so diverse move together and to be cohesive and to appreciate a shared identity. And that means you can have a different faith, a different skin color, you come from a different country, you can be an immigrant. All of these things are possible. But if you're the professional managerial class and you just say, we don't really care about that, why should anybody else? Why should anyone else do it? Right. And with the issue of immigration is that, people finding refuge, I understand that. Finding a better way of life, I understand that too. I think that, first of all, you have to think about the people that are already there, about their interests here. But I mean, there's that added, it keeps going on. You want to recreate where you came from in your new country. Well, no, that's not on the agenda here, okay? Because you're making a transition. Right. And there's nothing wrong with expecting people to honor the native culture, the culture that has been long-standing. There has to be reasons why you were attracted to it to the first place to come. So, I mean, everyone has to make some compromises, but not the compromises saying the culture and the historical journey of a people can be just thrown out, okay? Because, well, according to this law and this law, well, no, we get laws also from our cultural and historical experience.
Right, well, that's it. I mean, and now France used to pride itself as saying, okay, well, you come here and we actually ram Frenchness down your throat. We basically, this is our country. We have our, laws, our constitution. It's very secular and you have to adopt it. Doesn't work in the sort of the world of the EU. You got to respect all these things, they've tried all these, hey, you can't wear, burqas, or you can't have any religious symbolism in the schools and so on. It hasn't worked. Moreover, there's also the issue of the second generation, because even if you were to say that the first generation will say, oh yeah, we just want to be French, we love France, the second generation, the ones who grow up, they don't have that. They come back and they say, hey, I don't really like France, and no one asked me whether I should be living in France. And that's where often terrorism thrives. And the French are very worried about terrorism. They're worried at all times. I mean, there was a terrorist attack the other day. Somebody attacked a police station. A policewoman was killed. There was recently that shocking incident where a French school teacher was talking about those the cartoons, those anti-Mohammed cartoons, and then he was beheaded when he was going home from school. And the French are very concerned about this. These are the people we've brought here. They haven't turned into Frenchmen. They have continued with their fanatical ideas.
But see, having this civic identity is quite empty. And this is what happens. People say, that's not my identity. And a lot of, particularly in France, the default position will be your religion. Because if you look at all through the Middle East, that is your identity. These states are all relatively new. It's something that Nasser totally lamented, a nationalism, okay? And what the interesting thing is, the neo-colonial powers, they were terrified of Arab nationalism, and they just said, no nationalism, but we'll let you keep the mosque. Right. See what happened?
Yeah, no, that's very true. That's very true. The British did the same, and then the Americans did the same. They wanted to back the Islamists as opposed to the nationalists, and these Islamists won. We've been paying the price ever since. Yeah.
Yeah. So it gets down to the whole identity project, and from my life experiences, I mean, even living in Russia, talking to the older generation, the generation older than me, which is pretty old now, and their identities about being Soviet. Very few of them thought of themselves as Soviet. I was Russian, I was Ukrainian, I was Georgian, I was Lithuanian. Okay, and it didn't really work that way, and people. It shouldn't be remarkable to anyone. As soon as the Soviet Union came to an end, they started rebuilding churches and new churches, and I don't want to overrate religiosity here, because I need to do more study of it. But there's I don't know what the level of religiosity is, but I know the cultural attraction, okay, and attachment.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
I think that's exactly right. That in the early days, I mean, the Bolsheviks thought, okay, we'll
A bit of Russian culture.
yeah, then we'll bring them in. We'll have these Muslims, but primarily, they'll be able to practice their faith, but they will be Soviet. They will be, communist. Was it? Was it nationalist in form, socialist in content? I can't remember. I think that was Stalin's phrase. So yeah, they thought the same thing, but it didn't work out that way, which is why the Soviet Union became so anxious when Islamism really began to emerge as a serious movement in the Middle East during the 1970s, because they thought it's coming here, which is getting motivated.
And it did.
In Afghanistan, yeah, absolutely. So the French, I mean, this is what they're mostly concerned with. They are very concerned about terrorism. They're concerned about national identity. And that's what the election is going to be about. It's amazing that the left is nowhere in France. I mean, where are the leftist parties? It's sort of similar to other countries in Europe. Like, where's the left? In Britain,
well, I mean,
Johnson, very unpopular. He's still much more popular than the Labour Party.
But see, this is what's happened: is that the left has drank the toxic poison chalice. Is that they decided, let's go professional managerial, and that's why they've deluded themselves so much, because they have much more they're much more attracted to the elites, okay, than they are to their roots. Okay, this was a Faustian bargain. Okay, we see it all through the Western world.
Right.
Okay, and then when that happens again, when you take that, and particularly, I mean, in the traditional meaning of the word liberalism, I mean, that has a very, very long and rich cultural and societal history and roots to it, and references people can make. But see, if you sell that out, then other identities can take the void. Right. Okay. And particularly since the left isn't particularly interested in working people anymore, other people are going to do it, okay? We see this all through the Western world, okay? With the professional managerial class, they've consciously rejected the most important elements of the Enlightenment. And the elements of the Enlightenment that so much of the world would still like today. And they don't recognize that. They're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And it's only because of their own personal interest and their class interest.
Well, that's it. I mean, so like you have in the United States, you have a kind of a happy marriage between the corporatists who are happy to ship jobs overseas, happy to hire cheap labor, happy to close up shop, go somewhere, either cheaper where there's, no regulations or whatever. You got an alliance between them and the sort of the AOC crowd who go to the border and start weeping before the TV cameras. Oh, we got to let all these people in. So yeah, thank you very much. Nice source of cheap labor for Bill Gates and Zuckerberg and for Jeff Bezos. So it's a nice, happy marriage. Nothing in it for ordinary people, ordinary working people. But what they did, and there's a similarity with Macron, is they managed to get behind. This is a very unpopular agenda. These two things are extremely unpopular, but to get behind Joe Biden. Because they figured that, there's none of the candidates who ran, the 100 candidates who ran in 2020 against Trump, none of them could beat Trump. But they came up with Biden, good old lunch bucket Joe, nice, safe, centrist. You can't call him any names that he's an extremist and so on. They got behind him. So it's a sort of there's a sort of similarity there with Macron. You kind of invent this person, comes from nowhere.
Exactly.
He's the man who deliver the goods for us.
But he is the person that will protect the professional managerial class, because at the end of the day, George, most of them are very mediocre people.
Right.
The president of the United States, the president of France. Okay, this is what you get.
Right.
This is what. Oh, and I want to add to your checklist just to make sure. Most of the CEOs of American arms producers, they're women. Yay! Okay. Oh, do you think that the Secretary of Treasury has a conflict of interest? Oh, but she's a woman.
That's it. Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Are you troubled that the current Secretary of Defense was on the board of Raytheon? But he's an African American. These are not answers to my questions. They never answer your questions.
That's right. That's right. No, that's it. It's a wonderful way in which identity politics has managed to swamp any serious criticism of policy. Oh, okay. Well, that's it. So, I mean, you were just mentioning just before we started, but Glenn Greenwald's very good article on Substack about Natasha Bertrand. And very interestingly, that after he submitted that article, he was immediately attacked on Twitter repeatedly, vehemently, that you, Glenn Greenwald, are attacking a woman, a young woman.
You're a misogynist. You're a misogynist.
Yeah, exactly.
Accusing a gay man of misogyny. Exactly. I've heard it all.
So that's the way the debate goes. So then the question, and that's why in France, they are reacting against it. So now it becomes very interesting what will happen. I mean, if the government comes down very hard against them, that might spur a reaction, because I suspect these generals probably have quite a lot of support in the country. It's like, there's a lot of implicit, and within the military. I mean, although only a few officers signed it, but I am sure that that among the military there are a hell of a lot more officers who support this, but obviously for obvious reasons were afraid to sign it. So the government's in a dilemma. If they come down too harsh against it, there may well be a reaction against it.
Well, I mean,
they're not the goal. The country's not going to rally behind them the way it rallied behind the goal.
But it's going back to the very beginning of our conversation. Why has such a letter come into existence? This is the reaction to this ideology, this ruling class, and we shouldn't be surprised by it at all. And France, maybe not now, but France has a very, very long, glorious, inglorious military tradition. Okay, and a lot of people are looking for things to find attachment to, particularly after what we've gone through in the last year, where all your connections everywhere are being cut outside of alcohol, booze, porn, and Netflix, okay, which none of the above are good for you, okay? And so I think this is the reaction. We're to see more of it. And we could switch gears to the US. We got the January 6th rioters coming up. I'm predicting it's going to be a big deal, okay? Because they want to snuff it out. They want to snuff out any kind of dissent. No conversation. Oh, after all, a woman is a Secretary of Treasury. After all, African-American is a Secretary of Defense. Okay, that's what we're going to get.
And it's and that's why this letter would resonate among American readers, because they're saying, hey, the police use massive force against the yellow vest. They don't use massive force against the sort of the French equivalent of Antifa. So just in the same way. Now, again, the French defense minister, again, is a woman. So again, so it's a kind of very much the identity politics. And the French are, I say, no. So it's really really interesting. I think that next year's presidential election in France could be really quite earth-shattering, because normally it was like, okay, Le Pen loses, it's a kind of a ritual. Every few years you have a French presidential, either the father, Monsieur Le Pen, then the daughter. They always get clobbered by whoever is the centrist candidate. Might not work this time. There's been too many things. There was the yellow vest movement, the lockdowns. You may not, you can't step in the same river twice or 3 or 4 times. So Le Pen could pull it off. If Le Pen does pull it off, then it does shake up the political system in Europe.
Yeah, well, and Brexit wasn't a one-off anomaly,
Right,
okay?
right,
I
right.
mean, this is something that these professional managerial people, they cannot face that, okay? Because they see it as it's a ideology and a system of governance that can only go in one direction. It can't regress, because if it regresses, then it must be the people's fault somehow. It can't be the idea. It
Right.
can't be the idea. Because
Right.
they have the keys to the kingdom. They have the secret words, okay? It's all nonsense.
Right.
60 years of this nonsense, okay? Right. And why, maybe some of our viewers don't know, but why is it called the Yellow Vest movement? Why? It's because, under French law, if you own a car and you have car problems and you want to fix your tire or something like that, you have to put on a yellow vest to show other motorists that, you're having some problems. But it's a perfect metaphor. They are in distress. Right. They are telling the world they're in distress. Right. Okay, and this is what we're seeing, and all across the Western world, people are yellow vesters. Okay, they're in distress.
Right. No, and I think, and if you remember how the movement started, it started precisely because Macron wanted to pursue this good Green New Deal, green policy, which led to high fuel prices. So now, these truck drivers.
No, because the French government said go diesel. Yeah. Everybody went working people that have to drive a car or a truck, a service vehicle, right. And you have to change your form of energy. And then they said, no, we're going to switch it back, which is more expensive. They're saying, well, we did exactly what you told us to do because you are the mandarins of the universe. You knew what was right. No, you're wrong again.
Right. No, that's it. And I think that if when talking about this, fighting climate change, this is not going to go down well with ordinary working people, because, these are people who are barely surviving as it is. They cannot afford more expensive fuel, fuel prices. They cannot afford to pay more for energy. I mean, if you're just a truck driver delivering lettuce to the marketplace, you can't afford to pay more for fuel.
Sure.
More of this kind of thing, and all in the name of fighting climate change. It's not going to go down well, and that's why. I mean, this yellow vest movement, it was gaining serious steam. It was week after week that people would show up, and it was only because of the lockdown that it came to an end. It was mandated that it come to an end. They couldn't demonstrate anymore because the police would just use such force to break them up.
But, and they were
so that movement is still there.
Well, because the problems haven't gone away. I mean, all through rural France, pharmacies, hospitals, all kinds of government services are being shut down, okay? And people have to drive further and further to get services, okay? So, I mean, anyone with two brain cells to rub together, I mean, it's already been talked about, I guess kind of, what was it? Pete Buttigieg, he was talking about a fuel tax. Oh my, you want a revolution on your hands? Right. Go fuel tax, okay? Yeah. Oh. As John Kerry is in his private jet, fine, go ahead.
That's it. Yeah. No, that's it. And it's an unfortunate thing is that Macron looks exactly like the kind of person who himself is very untroubled by higher fuel prices. Higher price, anyway, he exudes comfort and the ease of someone who lives very well. There's a guy who worked for Rothschild.
And
he comes along and tells people, hey, all in the name of the environment, you're going to have to pay more for fuel prices. Yeah, it doesn't look good,
And his mother, wife takes care of him. Okay, right. So no, pampered little guy. He always has been. Right. So be fair. He has talked about some European security infrastructure that I'm open to listening to, okay? But I mean, the reason why George and I are doing this letter, we're not trying to pick up on some obscure letter here. It may be obscure for, because it's not going to be widely talked about. We're talking about it because we think it's very, very important until it's a sign of the times. and a confirmation, sorry, everyone, that George and I are right on this issue.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's it. And I think that just like the 2016 vote, Brexit signaled a major political change in Europe and the United States. Brexit first, then Trump in the United States. This French campaign may well signal also major transformations in Europe. So
what I think is silly, and we keep hearing it, is that Brexit one off, Trump one off. We'll go back to normal. We'll have, we'll continue down the, the Green New Deal, of course, is the cover for the Great Reset and all this. And they have, George, all of the people pushing this and their pliant minions in the media, they forgot to ask the people what they think about all this.
No, that's exactly right, and that's why I think this letter is significant. I think it's quite a big deal that the generals should put their name to essentially a call to arms and say the French government has got to do something, and if it doesn't, bad things are going to happen. So that's a serious business, So after all, the French do have they have long memories, and they know about generals in politics.
They have practice, George.
Exactly. Even their great man Napoleon, after all, was he seized power. A general seized power, so they're not. It's a business that they tread very warily on that. Yeah. But all right, we'll maintain our customary laser-like focus on European politics and France and the EU and so on. So look us up on Rumble. We're on Rumble. And remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.